Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Jahmyr Gibbs, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about trade targets for Week 2 of the 2023 fantasy football season. Now, I speak from experience when I say that after every single Week 1, there are overreactions. There are going to be fantasy prospects on your team that produced far beyond our wildest expectations, while there are other prospects that we spent high draft capital on, and unfortunately, they didn't pan out in Week 1, and they put up underwhelming performances, to say the very least. Nonetheless, we want to go ahead and not overreact. In fact, we want to go ahead and find the other teams within our leagues that are overreacting, dealing with injuries, and we want to take these valuable prospects off their rosters. Again, just from what we saw last night, you go from Sunday to Thursday. Kenneth Gainwell is the starting running back of the Philadelphia Eagles. By the time we get to Thursday, he's injured, he misses the game, and DeAndre Swift, a player that we all spent high draft capital on, ends up having a performance that not only puts the entire league on notice, but continues to validate our expectations from the offseason. A guy that had himself, very little utilization on Sunday, goes into Thursday and has himself a massive week and will continue to, behind an incredible offensive line, find success for fantasy football purposes. But going forward, we want to ensure that a lot of these other fantasy prospects that did not have great Week 1s can get onto our rosters so that when in fact they find their footing and continue to find success for the remainder of the season, we are putting ourselves in the best possible positions for fantasy purposes. Now, before we get into all that content, we'll be talking about running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that you should be targeting going into Week 2 prior to, of course, Sunday's games. A reminder, for those of you who have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Again, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season. So whether it is trade targets, weekly rankings at all 4 primary positions, whether it's live streams Saturday afternoon, answering starters to questions, Sunday morning live streams from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, all of that for the singular purpose of trying to help you guys win a 2023 Fantasy Football Championship. So be sure to go ahead and subscribe, click the like button down below, and of course, comment down below how much I look like Patrick Star today. This shirt did not really bode well, but this is all I've got. Thank you very much. Additionally, the final thing I wanted to mention before we talk about these prospects, if you guys have not yet already, you want additional content for the remainder of the 2023 season in order to give you an advantage upon your league mates, be sure to travel down to the description of the video and check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, when you use code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get the first-time deposit match, you'll also get rankings sent from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. This is rankings by position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense. Includes flex rankings, half PPR, full PPR rankings by tier. All of that available to you every single Sunday morning. So regardless of what you're doing on Sundays, you have the most equipped lineup to lead yourself to success. So be sure to take advantage of the opportunity today. Help me help you. Again, for those of you who are wondering if you're eligible, check out the map to the right side of the screen. Play via Underdog Fantasy, whether it's putting together some pick'em slips and or drafting responsibly. For those of you who did not receive an email from me in Week 1 and you signed up between August 1st, 2023, and of course, any day prior to that Sunday of Week 1, be sure to reach out to me via social media or even the business email down in the description of the video. I want to ensure that everyone gets that email every single Sunday morning. So be sure you check your spam folder first and foremost. But if you still did not receive it, be sure to reach out so that we can get that all settled with Underdog Fantasy so you can get those rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into talking about some of these trade targets that I really want to get on my teams for the remainder of the season. First and foremost, it is Jahmyr Gibbs. Taking on the Seattle Seahawks this week, I think this is a fantastic matchup for Jahmyr Gibbs to finally be featured within this backfield and truly be given the amount of opportunity that he deserves in order to be extremely fantasy relevant. So we want to make sure he's on roster before he has that breakout game, and then it's no chance of you going ahead and potentially trading for him for the remainder of the season. Now in Week 1, he was limited. The man literally only played 27.14% of the offensive snaps, 19 of the 70 overall snaps as an offense. Nonetheless, in those 19 overall snaps, 7 rushing attempts for 42 rushing yards, a 6-yard per carry average, incredible. 2 targets, 2 receptions, 18 receiving yards, 9 yards per reception, 7 fantasy points, and a half PPR scoring format. Yet with those opportunities, was able to force 6 missed tackles and additionally had 2 runs of 10 or more yards. The amount of explosion, the eye test, Jahmyr Gibbs has passed everything overall thus far. And even though he wasn't given much opportunity in Week 1, it was said by Dan Campbell prior to that Thursday Night Football game against the Kansas City Chiefs that the key is to not go ahead and give him too many touches to where we break him. We want to make sure that he feels comfortable. And that was the entire purpose of Week 1. They wanted him integrated within this offense without putting too much on his plate. Now, going into Week 2, the comments that Dan Campbell has made is now that we've got that under their belt, so for Gibbs, he'll begin to get more touches now. They've gone ahead and they've established, hey, Gibbs, this is the NFL speed. This is the level. You're obviously up to that level and are far more efficient than someone like David Montgomery. We're going to now go ahead and give you all the touches that you require to be fantasy relevant. And like I've mentioned all offseason, Dan Campbell, formerly a tight ends coach of the New Orleans Saints back in the day when Alvin Kamara and, of course, Mark Ingram were the backfield duo in 2017, Alvin Kamara's rookie year. Sean Payton was very careful with Alvin Kamara, wanted to go ahead and slowly get him integrated in the offense before he gave him the entire full workload that he did late in the season. Again, Alvin Kamara in the first 4 games of his rookie year, 15 rushing attempts. That kind of slow progression is probably not going to be the case, considering Alvin Kamara was competing with Mark Ingram and Adrian Peterson early in his rookie year, while, of course, we have a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs only dealing with David Montgomery. So I'm expecting that acceleration to hit this week against the Seattle Seahawks. And David Montgomery having himself such a great week 1 with 21 rushing attempts for 74 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, 13.4 fantasy points. Just take this into account. 21 rushing attempts for an entire 17-game season with David Montgomery is 357 rushing attempts. They're not going to give him 300-plus rushing attempts this season. We saw from Jamal Williams last year. Jamal Williams had 250 rushing attempts for over 1,000 rushing yards, 17 rushing touchdowns. We're still going to see David Montgomery get ample opportunity on the ground, but more importantly, we're going to see Jahmyr Gibbs be given the opportunity we know he deserves and he is so efficient with over the course of the remainder of the season. Week 1 was just a test, and now that he's passed that test, he is going to be a fantasy difference maker and someone that you want to have on roster, so be sure to go ahead and trade for him. Now, for those of you who are wondering, Andrew, who should I be trading him for, or what should I be kind of looking for to give away to get Jahmyr Gibbs in return? Be sure to go down to the comment section and let me know in specific what players you have, because every single one of you play in different scoring formats. All of you play in scenarios where you have different rosters. So it is going to play a difference. So be sure to give me as much context as possible so that I can help you out in terms of responding to those questions down in the comment section. Thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about another running back. It's Josh Jacobs. Like I mentioned earlier with, DeAndre Swift having a dud of a week 1 performance, then going into week 2 and having himself an explosive week of over 25 fantasy points. We have seen other running backs over the course of the years have dud early season experiences that eventually turn into top 12 fantasy running backs. You go back to last year in specific. Week 3 of last year, I had a trade targets video. In that video, I talked about, hey, we should be targeting Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Ramondre Stevenson, and Dalvin Cook. All those running backs at that current time going into week 3 were RB 16, 30, 29, 51, and 28. They all had very underwhelming early experiences within the 2022 season, yet by the end of the season, they all finished within the top 12 rankings at the running back position. It is purely a matter of understanding the skill, the volume of opportunity, and the fact that, yes, you're going to have inconsistencies of performances, but the great players, they make plays over the course of the entire of the season. And one, dud week isn't the biggest difference maker, especially in regards to someone like Josh Jacobs, who truly last season demonstrated, finishing as the RB3 overall, that he is capable of far more than what he did in week 1. Week 1, 19 rushing attempts, only 48 rushing yards, a 2.5 yard per carry average, 3 targets, 2 receptions, 23 receiving yards, 11.5 yards per reception, and only 8.1 half PPR fantasy points. He did end up playing 47 of the 57 snaps. That's 82%. And again, 21 total touches within that game. That volume of opportunity is no joke. And the fact of the matter is, going forward within an offense that, of course, is capable with Jimmy Garoppolo, and we had questions as to whether or not they'd be efficient going forward. Obviously, I think those questions have been put to rest. Josh Jacobs is someone we have to have on roster, because even though many of you may have drafted him and are thinking, man, he ended up having a dud week 1. We've seen that in the past from him last year. He put up 7.7 fantasy points in week 1 of the 2022 season. We're going to see ourselves slow rolls, especially someone who's coming off of a holdout and wasn't a primary participant throughout training camp. He's working off the dust that he built up in the offseason. And once he gets back to full form and full stride, we know what he's capable of as a 3-down back and one of the best in the National Football League. Let's move on to the next player. It is Cooper Kupp. Now, this position could be filled in with many other wide receivers, primarily wide receivers who has missed time due to injury. Players that could be slept on in terms of what their potential upside value is based on the fact that they haven't been active. It's a little bit different than a player like, Josh Jacobs, who did not perform well in week 1. But Cooper Kupp's value going into the 2023 season, of course, is known by us. But for those of you that have league mates that perhaps aren't as aware, Cooper Kupp, Jerry Jeudy, Christian Watson, players that have not played thus far, who have been dealing with injuries, can be, potential trade targets that we want to go after. And honestly, we could put Jerry Jeudy on screen and Christian Watson, but I'll go ahead and give you guys a full overarching idea as to why we want to make these moves. If you are dealing with teams in your leagues that, of course, don't start off well in terms of their overall record, perhaps they start 1-2, 0-3, 0-4 potentially, if in fact they're dealing with Cooper Kupp trying to come back from that IR stint. They may be in a league in which you have 12 teams and only 6 of them make the playoffs. You may be in a league where you have 10 teams and only 4 of them make the playoffs. If that's the case, and one of the league mates within your overall league potentially starts off slow and doesn't end up winning games early, they could end up losing their entire season because of that slow start. So you might want to go ahead with the potential roster that you have. If in fact you started off hot, some of the overall draft investments you've made have gone ahead and panned out, potentially in Tyler Algier as a late round grab, potentially panning out almost immediately. These kind of overall situations can provide you far more potential of making a trade in which you can look for a Cooper Kupp, Jerry Jeudy, Christian Watson to grab and join to your roster. I mean, again, we're talking about Cooper Kupp in specific because we know what he's capable of. I mean, Matthew Stafford with Puka Nacua in week 1. 15 targets, 10 catches, 119 receiving yards. With Puka Nacua, a rookie wide receiver out of BYU. Imagine when Cooper Kupp comes back healthy, what kind of potential upside he has with Matthew Stafford, who has said this offseason that he is the healthiest he has felt in years. That obvious IR stint late last season, shutting him down early, really did lend well to his overall health, the elbow, the neck, everything. So going forward, when we're talking about Cooper Kupp, a guy that last season was averaging 20.31 fantasy points per game prior to his injury, there is a lot of potential in investing in players that have not shown what they're capable of because people in your league may sleep on them. Cooper Kupp is one of those options. Now, before we continue on and talk about some other potential trade targets, a reminder for those of you guys who have not checked out the 1.01 brand, the official merchandise line of the Andrew Kirchhoff YouTube channel, be sure to travel down to the description, check out the link. Again, we're providing high quality, comfortable, and stylish clothing for your upcoming stressful fantasy football Sundays for the remainder of the season. So be sure to go ahead, rep the channel, support via the greetings and salutations, tie-dye hoodies. Again, those are champion branded, so we know it's high quality. So for those of you who are interested, be sure to go ahead, check that out today. Greatly appreciate the support. All right, let's talk about another wide receiver by the name of T. Higgins, one that is associated with an elite offense. We know that to be the fact. Even though Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon, T. Higgins all had very underwhelming week 1s, it seemed like they were playing their 4th preseason game. And eventually they're going to have themselves a rebound week, and I think it's going to be here in week 2. Primarily because even though T. Higgins came away with 0 fantasy points, it's a lot different than what Drake London was able to produce in week 1. T. Higgins was given opportunity. T. Higgins is associated with an elite quarterback. 8 targets. Even though he wasn't able to actualize any of those targets, we know that he played 95% of the total offensive snaps. And going forward, he's going to have himself high upside of potential based on what he's been able to contribute, not only in 2022, but back in 2021. 2021 was averaging nearly 8 targets per game, 5 catches, 78 receiving yards, 0.4 receiving touchdowns per game, 13 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. 2022, over 8 targets per game, 5.5 receptions per game, 77 receiving yards, 0.54 receiving touchdowns per game, and 13.86 fantasy points per game in the games in which he was healthy and did not miss a significant amount of time because, again, there were 3 different contests last year where he played about 1 to 25% of the snaps, then left early with an injury. Ultimately, we know that T. Higgins, when healthy, is a dominant player. And even though week 1 does not speak to that, we can absolutely take advantage of this opportunity by trading for T. Higgins, a player that is going up against the Baltimore Ravens secondary, a team that wants to make a statement with a bounce-back game against a secondary in specific who will not have Marlon Humphrey and or Marcus Williams, 2 of their starting defensive backs. That in itself leads me to believe that T. Higgins needs to be invested in, a player at the wide receiver position that if in fact you need help, maybe we're looking to move Garrett Wilson to go ahead and grab a T. Higgins, even though, it is rough to even throw that into the universe. It's the fact of the matter with all that has happened with the New York Jets and all that kind of jazz going forward. Okay, another player I wanted to mention at the wide receiver position, it is DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore is one of these players that I want to go ahead and invest in, primarily because Justin Fields throughout his entire career, 2021 and 2022, has demonstrated starting slow. In last week's performance, does not surprise me in any sort of factor. So to be honest, this could be a commentary as to the potential of trading for Justin Fields as well. But let me just go ahead and put this out here first and foremost. Justin Fields from weeks 3 through 7 of his rookie year was averaging 6.89 fantasy points per game. Eventually had a shift from weeks 8 through 15, averaging 19.68 fantasy points per game. You go back to last season, weeks 1 through 4, averaged 9.39 fantasy points per game throughout the first month of the season. Then there was a shift from weeks 5 through 17, averaging 23.5 fantasy points per game. I'm expecting there to be a shift very soon here with Justin Fields, and especially that is going to impact DJ Moore and his potential for fantasy purposes. A wide receiver that we know throughout his entire career with the Carolina Panthers played with 8 different starting quarterbacks. We're talking about Cam Newton, Taylor Heineke, Kyle Allen, Will Grier, Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Darnold, PJ Walker, Baker Mayfield. And throughout all of that quarterback carousel, every single season, every single week, this man has finished as the wide receiver 18, 22, 19, and 22 this most recent season. He has been a top 24 wide receiver, and I truly believe he is going to live up to that potential. And even though he had a very difficult matchup against Jair Alexander in week 1, in which we warned you guys about, there is a potential in which DJ Moore is going to have himself a bounce back week here. And this is going to be the difference maker as to whether or not you're going to be able to invest back into the potential of DJ Moore, or potentially invest in him now, then flip him as a sell high option going forward. DJ Moore takes on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this weekend. In the last 8 games against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, of course, he used to play them twice a year over the course of his career because he was a Carolina Panther. He has averaged 14.68 fantasy points per game against that defense, putting up 12 plus fantasy points in 7 out of the last 8 games against that defense. In specific, last season, 7 catches, 69 and a touchdown for 16.1 fantasy points, and 6 catches for 117 and a touchdown for 20.7 fantasy points. DJ Moore is going to have himself a big weekend here, so why not go ahead and trade for him, get him on roster before that takes place. All right, the final player I wanted to mention is a tight end, a player that it is going to be difficult to trade for, but there is only a small contingency of tight ends at this current moment in time that have elite upside. Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, of course, guys like Mark Andrews, George Kittle, and Darren Waller. Those are the elite players, guys that have the contention of not only being top 5, which we're all expecting them to be, but be in the conversation of being a top 2 tight end every single season. I mean, when you look at the history of George Kittle and his seasons, he's been a top 4 tight end in 4 out of the last 5 seasons. The only season in which he didn't perform as a top 4 tight end for fantasy purposes is because he missed significant time. In fact, he's missed time throughout his entire career. And if it was not for that case, he would be a top 2 or 3 tight end in every single fantasy season. So when we go into the 2023 year, he's already dealing with a groin injury. Many of the league mates that you have that have George Kittle on roster, may be worried after his very much so dud performance. But you got to remember, late last season with Brock Purdy from weeks 13 through 18, we had George Kittle averaging 14.25 fantasy points per game. Incredible production. Was able to set a career high in receiving touchdowns last season because of his efforts with Brock Purdy. And this offense already starting off hot in week 1 against a strong Pittsburgh Steelers defense. They sent a message to the entire league. No one's going to stop us. And if that's going to be the case, I want to go ahead and get a piece of this offense. And if I can't get Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, because they're already, such high valued players based on their week 1 performances, and I wasn't able to draft someone like Deebo Samuel or George Kittle, those are players that I may be looking to invest in at this current moment in time. I mentioned it earlier this week on purpose. Deebo Samuel's the thumbnail of our wide receiver rankings videos because he is a stud against the Los Angeles Rams. He's going to have himself a big week here. We talk about George Kittle from 2021 through 2022 against teams in the NFC West, against the Rams, Cardinals, or Seattle Seahawks. He's averaging 15.26 fantasy points per game in the last 10 games against those teams. In the last 2 years, he's averaging 11.5 fantasy points regardless of which opponent he plays against. So in my opinion, a tight end that has so much value. In a league in which we don't have so much tight end upside, we want to go ahead and take advantage of the opportunity that he did not play well early in week 1. And that he has already practiced in full going into week 2. We know he's healthy from that groin injury. We know he's going to play far more potential snaps. George Kittle is a guy that we want to have on roster, especially if we don't have an established tight end already on roster going forward. All right, that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you everybody for watching. Again, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe. If you have not yet already, be sure to go down to the comment section and let me know, what potential players you have on roster and who you're looking to trade for. I'll be sure to let you guys know down in the comment section whether or not I would make those trades, who I'd be looking to go after, who I'd be offering based on what you have on roster. Try to help you guys as much as possible. Tomorrow we'll be live streaming from 1 to 3 p.m. PST, and on Sunday morning from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time as well. So be sure to swing on by if you guys need your questions answered for week 2. Outside of that, thank you everybody for watching. Be sure to go ahead again, use code Andrew via Underdog Fantasy, make that first time deposit to get my rankings on Sunday morning. Now, for those of you who did not receive my email Sunday of week 1 and you signed up prior to that from August 1st, 2023 to, of course, that week 1 Sunday, be sure to reach out to me via the email down in the description of my video, and or potentially, one of the socials, whether it's my Instagram, X, Twitter, whatever it is. Be sure to reach out so we can make sure that you are on that email list for the remainder of the season so that you have those rankings available to you. I appreciate y'all, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.